just so everyone knows, the recording is in progress. But the only person they can see is me at the moment, so that's okay. So, thank you very much for inviting me. And although my specialism is in with the coins side of the Spink business, I'm delighted to be giving a talk this afternoon, hopefully a very brief one, to introduce you to the world of being an auctioneer, possibly inspiring people in the future, perhaps some of our younger members here, to think about the role of auctioneer and also what's entailed. So the best way to start the discussion on auctioneers is probably to give you a short and brief history about auctions, where they come from, why is it that we have chosen as a society, the best way to decide the value of things is actually to go to a public room and shout out numbers and wave our hands around about things. So the actual history of auctioneering goes back to ancient Greek times. The idea of solving one's debts and solving one's disputes by going to a public room and solving one's issues with a market value of things is nothing new. The idea of candle auctions, which is the idea of bidding until the time a candle burns out, is something that Samuel Pepys talks about, the famous diarist in the 17th century. And that, at that time, in the London market, there was actually only one auctioneer. So although our history as Spink comes from the middle of the 17th century, we didn't actually start in the auction world. We were goldsmiths. John Spink was a goldsmith who started in 1666, just after the Great Fire of London. At that time, in the same time as Samuel Pepys, there were actually these candle auctions that were run by the town crier of London. He was the only person in London at the time who was licensed to be an auctioneer. And of course, being someone who could carry his voice was quite an appropriate job for him. By the end of the 17th century, there was such dispute about the way that this was being done that private auction houses started themselves up. So the likes of Christie's and Sotheby's start to be born at the beginning of the 18th century. And similarly, our connection, Marshall Spink, starts his first auction, not in London, but in Staines, in Middlesex in 1792. And the idea of being a specialist auctioneer, like we are today, with our small collectibles division, is actually something that really starts to develop at the end of the 18th century. Prior to this point, it was very much in the role of local auctioneers doing general sales of anything that came through, whether it was house clearances, whether it was probate sales, things of that nature. So the role of specialist auctioneer actually cutting their teeth on things came around the same time as it did for Spink, but it also did for the likes of Christie's and Sotheby's. So as a role, the performance of an auction is something that obviously is carried through to the present day, and is something that provides excitement and is something that has provided entertainment for people ever since. The idea of market value is something that is often expressed when it comes to auctions, because there's this view that auctions are the best way of achieving a market value. Now, strangely as an auctioneer, I'm happy to admit that is not always the case. Sometimes things can be bought and sold privately at a far better price than auction. But as a general rule, an auction is the best place for public scrutiny to take place, and that's why we have continued and been so successful over 300 years of doing that as a practice. So in the present day, as you well know, as we're here as sponsors of Stampex, one of our main and core remits is in the philatelic department. But as I say, I come from the numismatic division. We also have military medals and banknotes, so the traditional small collectibles. In recent years, of course, as the word lifestyle has come to the fore, we have also started to incorporate modern collectibles. You may perhaps have read of things like non-fungible tokens, digital media, cryptocurrencies, things of that nature, all of which Spink is now actively involved in some regard. So things like selling of whiskies, handbags, and modern collectibles, things that are of interest to people today, very much a reflection of the way that auctioneers are moving. And certainly with the likes of COVID, that mercifully we seem to be largely behind us now, although it's still a daily presence, that very much has changed the auction world again. And in the same way that we perhaps don't go shopping in a shopping centre so much anymore, the auction world has very much had to adapt. And so one of the things we've done at Spink is very much moved a lot of our business to being an online presence. Now, that then ultimately means the role of the auctioneer as a standing person is somewhat a moot point nowadays. But if we can come up in the same way that shopping centres have come up with entertainment, come up with special offers, things of that nature, then very much for the future at least, we can see the role of a standing auctioneer standing up, yelling and screaming. And so you may perhaps have had some engagement with auctions on TV. You may have seen programs like Flogging, you may have seen programs like Cash in the Attic, things of that nature. And I suppose in a sense that gives a role of an auctioneer that suggests we have lots of time on our hands, that we like to bide our time, that we can, we see a room and we can play with the room. Part of that is true, but part of it is very much done for counts. Certainly in our world, when we're dealing with 600 or 700 lots in a day, we certainly don't have 5 minutes to drag out a lot. Otherwise, the people in the room would very much get bored of what we're doing and leave, as they have their right to do. So quite a lot of the things we do, we may only dwell for 20 or 30 seconds on a lot. And the reason we do that is not because we don't want to give them their time, it's because actually the way that the auction model works is the secret to an auction is nothing to do with the auctioneer standing up and selling the item and encouraging bids. It's actually in the build up to the auction, whether that's producing a printed catalogue that we can flick through in the 3 or 4 weeks before a sale, or whether that's looking through online listings and things and deciding what we want to buy. So 90% of the auctioneer's job is actually done before they stand on the rostrum. That extra 10% is the inspiration and engagement that I, as an auctioneer, can get out of you as the bidding public to engage you. And often it's a psychological process. There is a battle that takes place between the bidder or anyone in the room and the auctioneer. And ultimately, the battle is won of the auctioneer if that person decides to bid. And they can do that in a variety of ways. I've had people winking at me, waving their feet, flicking their fingers, doing bunny ears, all sorts of weird things to attract my attention, because they don't seem to want to be seen by anyone else doing it, but they do weird things when they're directing their communications at me. So from that point of view, as an auctioneer, you often have to be scanning the room. And that's the most important thing. When you're doing a public auction, you have to be engaging the people that have bothered to turn up in the room. They're your most important clients also. Second comes the telephone bidders, because they bother to book a telephone line with you. And then comes the internet and book bids, because those people have left their bids in advance, or they haven't bothered to turn up, they've got their feet up somewhere else in the world, and actually they're just bidding away online. So I have to collate in that 20 or 30 seconds that I have the interest on that particular lot, 4 different points of communication. And ultimately the buck stops with you as an auctioneer. So it is a challenge, but often what you find is it's not about getting perfection every time. Ultimately, you're legally selling something, so yes, you have to make sure that the clear bid is with one person. Clarity is very, very important. But actually, it's not about being a computer genius and knowing all the numbers in the world and throwing numbers out there and shouting numbers like you might at a cattle auction. It's not about that. You have to have clarity in what you do. And so making mistakes is part and parcel of the job. But the role of an auctioneer is to say, hey, hands are up, everyone makes mistakes, we're all human, let's have some fun with this. And the best auctioneers are ones that can admit to that and actually can engage the room, we can have a chuckle about it, and we can move on to the next lot. Because the whole important thing is keep people engaged for the entirety of the auction, so that by the end of it, both the buyers are happy, they've bought something, the sellers are happy, they've seen that you've tried your absolute best to sell these items, and you've ended up with a good result. Hopefully, a fair market price, the ultimate reason being auctioneer. And so there is a practical element to this that I understand we'll be doing at the end of the talk, which is rather exciting, which gives you an idea of how I, as an auctioneer, or indeed some of the people out here might want to practice as well, I don't know if you have time for that as well, how we actually engage the room, what we're looking for. And sometimes you can be quite cheeky. You can actually say, I'm sorry, sir, I've actually got a bid on the other side of the room. I've noticed you, but I'm working on 2 people. Because the one thing you don't want to do as an auctioneer is to get so confused that you're taking bids from lots and lots of people that you're circulating around the room. You have to really focus on 2 people. And if you have a fantastic and exciting lot, like we did earlier this week, when I stood up a rostrum and sold something for £400,000, which is a house record for a coin at Spink, I had 10 people waving their hands at me at the same time. And that is very unusual because you don't normally have so many people at the same time really wanting to bid. And you have to say, I'm terribly sorry, but remembering the buck stops with you, I'm taking the bids from this side of the room and this side of the room, and when one of them finishes, I'll come to you. But sometimes in desperation, people try to distract your attention, they try to get one over on you, all these things. But if you remember as the auctioneer, you're the one in control, you make sure who is clearly being taken the bid from. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to do. And so in that case, the role of auctioneer, it might seem glamorous, it might seem lots of effort, it might seem lots of control. But all it is simple little elements that come together with a performance that ultimately is imbued with the character of that individual. So you might be someone who's naturally quite shy, you might be someone who's naturally quite expressive. It doesn't really matter. All you need to do is show your personality on the roster, because that is ultimately the role of the auctioneer. It's effectively, a ticket for oneself to be oneself in front of lots of people and show. That's effectively what it is. A glorified salesman. It is a show. That is what an auctioneer is. And that's why I suppose, in a sense, just like town criers in the 17th century, having a large gob to do it is obviously quite useful. But no, certainly the role of an auctioneer, you can come from any background, any walk of life. We've had solicitors working for us. We've had academics working for us. We've had those who have an intense passion about following the latest trends in the market, the latest interests, the latest fashions. All of those people can apply themselves in very different ways and be very successful as auctioneers. So there isn't one area of the market or one area of life, if you're going into studies, that you think actually, in order to be an auctioneer in 10 years' time, I want to be doing this. Because in our line of work, and this doesn't apply to every line of auctioneering, our line of work is actually the house that is the auction house, and that is the licensed body. So we are licensed by Camden Council, and I am an auctioneer through that. In certain lines of work, if you're selling property, for instance, you have to have your own license to do so. So there are different roles within the remit of auctioneering that are different wherever you go. And certainly if you were to try and sell overseas, like we have in our New York office, and indeed in Hong Kong, they have different licensing arrangements there. So although I'm a licensed auctioneer in the sense of London, I couldn't then go and do it in New York. But of course, I still contribute to that. So there are little vagaries in the law that, of course, you have to follow and adopt. But in terms of actually being an auctioneer, the threshold for becoming it should not be seen as prohibitive in any stretch. All it is being, from your point of view, yourself on the roster. So making sure that ultimately, even if a mistake is made, legally speaking, it's clear who the high bidder is, it's clear that no one else can contest it, and you've had a bit of fun doing it. And that's ultimately the role of auctioneer, and that's why after 3 years of doing it, I'm still very passionate about it, and I still get a huge kick out of selling these things from start to finish, from the consignment stage all the way through to the conclusion, and then obviously taking the full decision for myself. That's what you do as an auctioneer. So I think now comes the time when I believe we have a practical element to this, and what I'll show you, and certainly in the demonstration of it, is we'll distribute a couple of these panels to give you an idea of what it's like in the auction world, and certainly what I'm seeing when I'm looking at it. And then what we might do if we have time is encourage someone else, if they do want to come up and give it a go, then I'll certainly invite someone else to do that for you. So if we can distribute some panels, that would be great. And this will give you an idea of an auction room. This is actually quite typical of an auction room. The number of people in here is quite typical. Obviously, we're not looking at the style of Christie's and Sotheby's where everything is packed, and certainly not in a COVID age, we recommend that at the moment. But the distribution of people is quite typical of an auction, because a lot of people are very private. They don't want to reveal to the next person sitting next to them they're going to bid on a lot. There's a lot of these bunny ears and all this kind of strange bidding going on that I, as an auctioneer, have to pick up and look out for. And some people, if I still haven't picked them up, they have to yell out. So you do get this quite aggressive nature of the auction going on as well. So the skill of an auctioneer very much is spotting these things. So I have an auctioneer's book here that I'm going to start with. And this is, it's called a book, but of course it's just a few pieces of paper. But effectively what this is a list of the lots that I have in front of me. And of course I look very clever because I can read out what it says on here and everyone thinks, how does he know all that information? It's because it's in front of me. You're given a lot of the information that you have. So it's, as I say again, 90% of the job is done for you. All of it is a 10% of you putting your personality into it. So please don't think the auctioneer is in somehow a highly specialised skill. It really is. It really isn't. So from the point of view of starting an auction, obviously the most important thing from a legal point of view is making sure that all the descriptions are accurate, all the condition reports are accurate, and the estimates are accurate, because otherwise you'll have a problem down the line. So once you've satisfied yourself that, the most important thing is obviously to announce the lot number that you have. So in this particular instance, and of course because we're a stamp show, we have some notional stamp lots for sale. So this is going to be new for me, as much as it is for you as well, because I've never been on a stamp auction before. But effectively what I have here is I'd be introducing the first lot, I'd be telling what people it is, but of course we're assuming we're in an auction room here, so either you'd be seeing the description of the lot on the screen, and you'd be seeing the bids that are coming in, or you'd have a description of the lot in front of you in a catalogue. And so you'd be deciding in the weeks that you've had in advance that you'd be bidding on this. Oh yes, you know your price, you know where to go to. And if someone takes it on competitively from your point of view, then you can decide, is that lot for me or do I let it go? That's the challenge of being a bidder in an auction, because often you have this preconceived notion of what you're prepared to spend for something. And then on the day of the auction, it's rocketed away either online or with someone else who's determined to have it. And then you have to think to yourself in the last 10 seconds before the lot closes, whether or not you decide to go further. And often people decide to bid more because of the prowess of the auctioneer, or because they can gauge what's going on. And many games happen in auctions. It's not a case of just buying the things you want. Some people, if they're really determined and really disappointed they've lost something, but they know that someone else they really don't like is going for it, they will try and push the price up, which makes my job very easy. But it does happen. All of these games happen in an auction, and the skill of an auctioneer is to recognise that that's happening and either call it out or encourage it further. And that really is the game that the auctioneer plays. And it very much is fluid, in the same way that a stand-up comedian might stand up and wait for someone to shout something out from the auditorium. It's exactly the same principle in that respect. So, without further ado, I will introduce lot number 1, which is a mixed collection of Queen Elizabeth II Commonwealth in a green stockbook. So what I might do at this point is I might have a joke, say, the green stockbook, that might be the most important thing about it. You don't know. And some people in the room might go, always focus on the wrong thing here, I might get this cheap. But I might already know that and deliberately reference the wrong thing, so I can have that interchange and ready going. So I have nothing on the book, so I'll start here with £5. Any advance on £5? It's called at the back of the room. £5, I see you at £10. £15 is bid, and 20. 50 is called. We've jumped ahead to 50. You're absolutely sure. I see you at £55 and 60. 60 to my right, 65. 65 is bid. I've seen your bid, you want 70. 70 pounds is bid, 75. You see how I'm engaging the room. I'm making sure that everyone is seeing what I'm doing, so it's absolutely clear. And often it's good pointing. So we're at 70 pounds to my left. Is there any advance on 70 pounds? 75 at the back of the room, you place. 80, a determined bidder in front here. A keen bidder, we like to see a passionate young collector, is 80 pounds against the back of the room now. 80 pounds and holding it at the front of the room, against you at the back at 80 pounds, they'll be selling at 80 pounds. Last and final chance, 80 pounds. Sold. Thank you very much, 433. And that's what you note down. It's as simple as that. So you've now won it. So I'll expect some payment at the end. But there we go. So it's as simple as that. All it is engaging a room and making sure that everyone is clear. And this is a simple demonstration, because this is only room bids. At the same time, what I'll be doing is I'll be going, okay, I see you on the internet, or I see you on the telephones, or I see I have book bids as well. So all it is a combination of all of those 4 things. And make mistakes, of course, you're human. But so long as everything is clear at the end, and it's very clear who's won, everyone in the room knows that, it's a fair auction, and you move on to the next stop. And it's just a rinse and repeat process for every single lot of sale. You see, I didn't dwell on that. It wasn't something that was done for stage effect that took 10 or 15 minutes, as you see on TV. It's very much, the lot is in, the lot is out, we move on to the next one. Because ultimately it is business. So if we should try a couple more, and then what we'll do is we'll invite someone up to see if they want to try their hand at it. Maybe they'll be inspired by the short talk today to go off and think about it. Because obviously the one thing we have in our present market is the collecting pool is very much male dominated, unsurprisingly. Everyone in their family has a collection of coins and a biscuit tin somewhere in the house, in the attic. They've probably found in the last 18 months doing COVID renovations, something of that nature. Many people remember schoolboy collections of stamps they may have had in the 1950s and 60s, and obviously what my colleagues in the stamp department deal with a lot. By our nature as human beings, we naturally are hoarders, but it seems very much on a male sphere more than a female sphere. And that's desperately sad, because some of the great collectors of the last 200 years have actually been females. Some of the greatest collectors of coins and some of the greatest collectors of stamps we've seen in the last 12 months have been females. And so, in a way, we should dispel this notion that it is only a male-dominated world. And certainly what we do at Spink, as you see with the number of young specialists that we have, and certainly female specialists that we have, and female auctioneers that we have, is we're very much on the prevailing wind, which is, this is a collectible sport for everyone, not just one type of individual. And that's very much what we want to dispel. And so we'll do a couple more of these, and then I'll invite someone up to try and give their hand themselves. And if there are any questions, of course, as well, then please do feel free to ask them. So we'll start with lot number 2. Congratulations on lot number 1, paddle 433. And it's also always useful to remember paddles. If you know that there's someone in the room that is a particularly interested or keen bidder, just remember that paddle. Because what you can do halfway through a sale, even if you're looking over here focusing on someone else, is say, are you coming in 433? And you engage them, immediately they're back in, and it's that sort of rapport that you're having with individuals. So even if they're not bidding on it. You're having a joke with them, even not on a moment of silence from them, so that they're always engaged. You're keeping people involved and moving with the sale. So, lot number 2. And we have the Rhodesia doubleheads, 13 of them, small group on a stock card. The catalogue value I've been given is £1,000 plus, but I will start at £120 for it, so £120. Is bid straight away from 433. Quite happy to continue bidding, that's what we like to see. £120 and holding to my left, 130 at the back of the room, 140 now. Thinking about 150 new place, 160. £160 in front and holding with you then at £160. 170 new place, 180, determined bidding, 190, 200. Now, what you can decide to do, if you think that you have more money in the bank than they do, you might be so confident, you might say to me, you might shout out a number, you might say 250 or 300. And then at that point, I'd say, well, now 300 is full, I've moved along. So you can actually guide the auctioneer. It's not just the role of the auctioneer to move the bidding along. You can tell them, if you're going too slowly, 250, I'll move it along, come on, get along with it. And that's part of the process of the battle that goes on between an auctioneer and a bidder. So it's £200 to my left, that's £200, and holding to my left, to be absolutely sure. It's against the rest of the room then. It's not with you online, and there's no one on the telephones, it's with you then, that's £200.
£1,000.
£1,000 is sold. That's a bit of a move. Well, I think we have a new catalogue record, so I think Stanley Gibbons will have to change the catalogue price for that one. That's £280,000. Just a small family home is now bid. Because of guys, I hope we can. I hope we have credit terms for that. I hope finance has checked that. That's £280,000. I mean, in an ordinary circumstance, you wouldn't be so keen, but it is that sort of process. You know, if you're frustrated with an auctioneer or the auctioneer is going too slowly, then you can do things like that. You say, "Come on, get on with it." You know, let's move it along. And that does happen. And the role and the skill of an auctioneer very much is to adapt to that, not just go, no, this is my place. Very much adapt to that and move on with the pace. Because it's quite clear that people want to get on with the auction, and that's fine. You know, so let's say £280,000 then. Why not for a book of stamps, which I think is a record for the stamp department, and we're selling it £280,000. What's your bid, sir? 290. You've even spotted the spin increments at 290,000. We like that. £10,000 increments. 300,000. This feels very much like Tuesday at £300,000. We've gone down. We've gone down in value now. It's not. See, that was the skill of Dutch auctions. Dutch auctions are the only time when you get auctions that start high and go low, because the whole point was you started at a price that people weren't prepared to pay. You ended up at a price where the pressure got too great that people were prepared to pay it. And that was the problems you got with Dutch tulips and things of that nature in the 17th century. But yes, in an auction, it's always one way. It's always upwards, it's never downwards. But yeah, from the point of view of the sale, yeah, I'm very impressed that people have learned the stink house increments as well, to be going up in £10,000 even at that level. But you do get instances like that. You get lots that surprise you. The example on Tuesday was we estimated it's at 10 to 15,000. I was still standing on a rostrum, looking like James Bond in my black tie, and selling it at 390 and 400,000. You know, it does happen sometimes. And as an auctioneer and as a specialist, you can be surprised. But you have to remain a poker face, because the last thing you want to do on a rostrum is reveal how happy you are that it's going for 50 times estimate, and let on the fact that you got that a bit wrong. You have a joke about it. You say, whoops, we were a bit underestimate on that one. You know, just own up to it, fess up to it. Anyway, so we're selling them at £300,000, a new family home down here at the front of the room. Last chance at 300,000. Sold 433, who's already spent the bank on the first 2 lots. So yeah, so it really is as simple as that. I mean, and you saw in that particular exchange, you had multiple individuals in a room bidding at the same time, and I made it clear, I've seen their bid, I've acknowledged it, but I've got to go to these 2 people. Out of respect to the people that were bidding first, I'll make sure that they are absolutely sorted before I then move on. And I'll clarify that, because, you know, there is a custom, there is a gentlemanly nature to it, there is a respect and a politeness to an auction that people can't just bully out of the way. Yes, you have a question?
20 minutes later or after the auction.
Yeah.
Young lady changes her mind.
Well, from the point of view of the symbolism of knocking the gavel down, that is a legally binding commitment. So you only do it with the point of view of knocking a gavel down. That's a legal commitment. So you have offered a price in the room, I've accepted that offer, and I've sold it. That's the contract being effectively signed at the point of the gavel. So we would then chase you for the money. That would be the simple point. So that's why in an auction room, we actually had this on Tuesday as well. We had someone who inadvertently flashed their bid card at the back of the room at £120,000. And I said, you cannot do that, because from my point of view, I'm so focused on bids, I would accept that as a bid. So you have to clarify, you're absolutely sure. And again, that comes as part of the process in the run-up to auction, because it's not about getting carried away on the day and going completely crazy for a lot. A lot of people that sit in a room either are agents, dealers, or collectors, and they will have a budget. If they exceed that budget, they'll let it go. And you'll see them, they'll do this sort of sign, or they'll go, I'll leave it. There'll be all sorts of strange expressions they do to show they're out. But people, by and large, know their limits and they don't go beyond them. And if they do, then obviously we've had a prior discussion with them and said, look, if you plan to do this, we need to know, because obviously we need to have, the ultimate reason that as auctioneers we're doing this is protecting the interests of our vendors. We have signed an agreement with our vendors to sell these things. We have to stand up and say, yeah, we're legitimately selling. So yes, the legal contract is signed when you knock the gavel down, effectively. And that's why you see when a rare instance of a lot being passed this thing, you won't see the gavel being knocked down. You'll hear an auctioneer audibly say, pass, because that, again, is a legal framework which basically says this lot is not being sold, the room is clear about that, and then we move on to the next one. So although there are subtle and joyous moments to an auction, there are actually important legal agreements within it that are signed by them. Yes. So that's a good question. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Yes, fire away.
Is there a particularly advantageous place to have a lot, the first one, the last one?
That is a really good question. There's often in the same way there's a psychology in the battle of how you estimate a lot for auction. And at Spink, we are masters of estimating things conservatively to get the run-up into an auction that it then goes for a good price. In the same way, there's often a suspicion that if you are the first one or two lots of an auction, especially if it's a short auction, you come in very cold. And so it's often a curse if you're lot number one or the first lot after a break in an auction, because often what you have is people that have, if they're online, they will have gone and disappeared, made a cup of tea, and they'll have been caught on the hop that the auction has restarted, and so they won't be participating. And it's very noticeable as an auctioneer. So what you'll often do is you'll try and hold out that first lot that bit longer than you would any other lot in the auction, because what you're trying to do is ensure there's no technical difficulties. People are alert, they're awake, they're realizing you're selling this. And sometimes you have to say to people, yes, we are actually selling this. Surprise, surprise, I'm an auctioneer and I'm selling a lot in an auction. And that suddenly gets the traction in it, because people just need that mental note and reminder. So it's very difficult because an auction has to start somewhere. But as an auctioneer, and certainly as a specialist, what you try and do is you try and have a build-up. So one of the things that I've been looking at, certainly within the coin world, and certainly what I've been working with colleagues in other departments, is how you build a sale now for collectors of today. Because the way that people collect has very much changed over the last 200 years. And I'm speaking specifically from a coin point of view, but I'm sure it relates very closely to stamps. Over the 200 years of collecting, very much the Victorian collector was very much the accumulator of everything. They wanted to be seen that they were knowledgeable in every field, whether it was Egyptology, ancient Greece, Rome, England, France, Europe, whatever it may have been. And very much the cabinets that they produced were very much representative of that. And what you often saw was the sacrifice of quality and rarity over commonality and completeness of a collection. So if you look at the sale catalogues of the 19th and early 20th century, everything is there constantly. Every sale is very much the same. Same catalogue, same number of lots, same number of items on offer. But very much the collector today, and in a reflection of how we are as human beings today, we like things immediately, we like things to be focused and condensed and comprehensible. And also because in, frankly, the modern family home, we don't have an entire space devoted to a library of numismatic or philatelic books. People collect very specific things. So often what you see is people dispense with a comprehensive collection and focus on one type. So in the instance of stamps, it might be penny blacks. In the instance of coins, it might be a silver crown, for instance. And so what we try and do when we build a sale, recognizing the way people are collecting today, is we put those together. So instead of looking at it from the point of view, obviously the reigns of stamps, where you go George V, George VI, Queen Elizabeth II, what we might do is we say, okay, well, there's a certain value of stamp, there's a certain value of coin, and we'll put those together in a run. So what you're effectively doing is you're gifting to a prospective buyer the opportunity in one foul swoop to not sit around all day at an auction, but actually sit in that concentrated block and collect things they like, and then they can move on. And if you have things that start at a very low value as a denomination and rise in value very significantly, as an auctioneer, what you can do as a special skill is you can design the catalogue from the outset to follow that crescendo. Because what that enables on the day of the auction is people to look at that and go, okay, I can feel we're building up. And that really is how you as an auctioneer can keep people engaged and ensure that even at lot number 1, you have strong bidding on it. But in answer to your original question, yes, there is a psychology of where a lot comes within the sale that means that sometimes it can do better and sometimes it can do worse. And as I said at the beginning, auctions don't always guarantee the best market price for something. In every auction, whether it's 100 lots or 1,000 lots, there will always be, as our CEO says, casualties. There'll be things that people don't notice. They'll be sleeping. People won't recognize the rarity of something. And so the skill of an auctioneer is possibly to bolster at that point that particular lot, or focus on it, or give it a larger introduction than perhaps I've given some things. But also, maybe it's a simple queue. I might be sitting down now. For this lot, I might stand up and I might say, okay, we're now on this one. So again, I've changed the way I'm presenting it to you, and people go, okay, I'll sit up. I will sit up and look at this. But you can't always win, and as an auctioneer, you have to accept that the price that's bid on the day is the price that it will sell. And sometimes if you think that was a bit cheap, you can say that. Oh, that was a bargain. And that sort of gets people thinking, what do I miss? What do I miss? Because then they're on the next lot and they bid more aggressively on the next one. So there are always ways and cues that you can use as an auctioneer to keep people focused in whatever way you're doing it. But in answer to your question, yes, it's very difficult to change on the day of an auction the order of a sale, because that's been set in stone 6 weeks before. So the question really relates to is how you build the sale from the start. And that really is the best skill of an auctioneer. Because as I say, 90% of the work is done well in advance of the auction. It's the final 10% where we engage in you as the bidder and making sure we're getting the best price for it. And that's the final skill of an auctioneer. But as I say, it can come from any walk of life. Whether you're someone who's detail orientated, whether you're someone who's photographically orientated, image based, something of that nature, or just have a genuine passion for history. It doesn't really matter what walk of life. Everyone has a particular set of skills they can apply to being an auctioneer. And all they need to do effectively is present themselves and engage the room. It's as simple as that. That's the be all and end all that's being an auctioneer. Yeah. Excellent. Any further questions? Other than where the £300,000 is coming. And of course the buyer's premium as well. Because the one thing people don't obviously realise is, although we're at the point of contract, we're quoting the hammer price, there is of course a buyer's premium, a privilege for selling through an auction. And so that's why the final secret I'll tell you as an auctioneer is, although you might have sat in an auction room and heard me sell something for £400,000, the next day in the paper you'll see it sold for £480,000. That's the buyer's premium. And that is something that as a bidder you have to be mindful of, because it's not just £300,000. What you have just given me is £60,000 for the privilege of buying the lot for me, so thank you very much. But that's the thing you have to be mindful of. And some people, even the most advanced collectors, are still caught out by that. You think, you're absolutely sure? So that's going to go for nearly £500,000. You're absolutely sure about that? And they go, yes. And you can see them working out of their head. And it's really quite interesting, because even the most skilled bidders and the skilled auctioneers, they're still caught on hot. And that's why you have to be flexible whenever you do an auction, because it's never going to be the same. Every auction is different. And that's why it's so interesting as a career. The one thing that most people would say about careers is they become very safe, they become very much dull. But with the auction world, it's different every single time, because you're dealing with all different fields, all different collectors, all different passions and theatres and genres, wherever you go, and all different values. And the biggest reward you can get from it, other than being in a position of preempting or predicting, if you're so in tune with an auction that you know that a certain individual, let's say we have a section of penny-like stamps, and you know that there's a certain collector in the room that has a threshold, and they're going to bid every time to £500 on that lot, even though every single lot is estimated at 100. As an auctioneer, you can pick up by lot number 2 or 3 of the 10 lots that they're going to do this. So you can immediately focus on it. You can go, let's see, should we start at 250? Why not? And then you see the bid come in. And it's almost like, you have a connection with that person, but all you're really doing is you're spotting as an auctioneer that halfway through these lots, they're bidding on every single lot, they're going for the same amount. And then what you can do is you can say, well, online, I have spotted that this particular individual who's bid up to £500 every single time. Maybe if you're prepared to bid 520, you might just win it. And the number of times out of 10 that they will do that because they go, yeah, okay, that's a good idea, is probably more than 50%. And it works two ways, because in the auction room, a lot of people are very uncomfortable about their identities being revealed. That's why we have padlocks. We don't shout out names. 100 years ago, we'd have shouted out names of bidders. People didn't mind. In the age of GDPR, and of course the age of confidentiality, people don't want their names shouted out, especially when the internet is listening and we don't know who's online. So what I will do is evening up the odds is in the same way that I will let the internet know who's bidding in the room. I'll let the room know who's bidding online, and I'll call them out online. So I give it a fair and even crack. So what you'll often hear me do if you watch one of my auctions is I'm shouting out the numbers. I'm saying there are 4 or 5 of you, 96, 27, 38. And so people in the room are furiously writing down all these numbers because they're going, oh, these are the people I'm competing against. And it gives it as fair as possible. And if people in the room know they're being treated fairly, they're far more likely to respond warmly when you go to them, yeah, you might want this to the bid. And that's the point of engaging the room. Because if you focus on one aspect of it far too much, you get disappointment somewhere. That happens in auction. Not everyone can win every lot they want. You have to make sure that you're fair. You're seen to be fair. And as I said at the beginning, if people have bothered to turn up to a room, I'm bothered to deal with them first because they have the respect to turn up. Then it's a priority order of all the other places. And I don't mind having a go at people online for bidding too late, or bidding as the gavel is full, or trying to conduct an auction in their own way, because that's fine. They're anonymous individuals, and the room really enjoys it when I have a go at the internet because it means I'm not having a go at them. So all of these things happen in auction, and in some ways it can seem almost unprofessional sometimes, because you're really castigating someone online for doing something that's not proper, not playing in the fair rules and spirit of an auction. But it's all part of the thrill of being in an auction, and it's the moment of magic every time you sell a lot. So it really can be quite an enjoyable experience. And for anyone who's been inspired today, we have auctioneers that's 25 years late. I started at 23 as an auctioneer, very young to be an auctioneer. We have auctioneers in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s. So there is no age or stage or career path, whether it's whatever line of work you've been in, or whatever you hope to achieve in the future as well, that will prevent you from being an auctioneer. All really you need to have is an interest or a passing passion, which I'm assuming you all do, being in this room here today, and obviously the fantastic Stampede show, to follow that passion. Because probably, as I'll leave you on a final thing, the overriding comment that is made to us as specialists and made to us by collectors is, I wish I had followed my career path, or I wish I followed my interests when I was younger. Because there's obviously that famous phrase, Oscar Wilde says, that history is wasted on the youth, because they don't understand it. And I hope that it's going to inspire people at any age, in any walk of life, to think actually, it's the reason our company motto is where history is valued. It's because we do. And it shouldn't be a barrier to anyone to be inspired to do that. So I'll leave you with that final note. So if there are any further questions, then I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for all of your attention. Thank you. Oh. No, amazing. Thank you very much. Cool. That's all right. No, thank you. Oh, look at that. There we go. Fine. No, pleasure. Yeah, that's fine. All that. Very expensive. Yeah. There you go. It does happen. Excellent. Super. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregory. That was brilliant.
No, pleasure. Pleasure.
Thanks, Greg.
Pleasure.
Full house.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Pleasure. Thank you. Oh, good. Where am I putting these?
Yeah.
Cool. Book. Secret book. Oh, that's aerophilaxis class. That's not right. Oh, thank you. No, pleasure.